kind of inspired by this idea of what weather forecasting has done. And I want to briefly introduce to you where your weather forecasts kind of come from, to kind of put context in what we're doing. And so your weather forecasts start on the left-hand side with a numerical weather model that simulates the physics of the atmosphere and the land in little grids across the world. That's then run into the future. Then we wait. New data comes in. Terabytes of data are downloaded 6 times a day from all diverse sources, whether it be from satellites, boats, weather stations. It all comes together. It all has, nothing is a complete picture of the world. Everything has differing levels of measurement uncertainty, different scales, but all that comes together to then update that weather model through a process that we call data assimilation, which helps constrain the conditions of now, so it's starting as close to the real world as possible before running out into the future. And then that numerical information is then converted into what we think of as a weather forecast of things like what's the chance of rain over the next week, highs and lows, to decision support. And ecology is really kind of undergoing this transformation, particularly with the rise of the EONs, the Ecological Observatory Networks. The data to do these sorts of things is now freely flowing with the development of sensors and satellites and coordinated networks. You'll hear one that I'm going to talk about a lot later, NEON, National Ecological Observatory Network, a 30-year NSF project that NSF's running themselves as a platform for data collection and standardized across 81 sites across the US, available in near real time. And so those sorts of platforms allow us to approach ecological prediction with this lens of predict, update, predict, update, predict, update. Yeah.
Is that data available in the public domain?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And is it okay if we record this?
Yes.
Do that.
Yeah.
That was exactly my question.
Wait, which one?
Whether or not that's publicly available.
Absolutely.
Do they have an easy use API to do it, or?
Yes.
Okay.
That could be a whole nother seminar I'm happy to give on how to access Neon data. You want me to just I use it extensively in my class. I run a whole research coordination network about using Neon data to inform forecasting, which I'll talk about later. Yeah, it's a major, it's awesome. I mean, everything from ticks to carbon cycle to water, everything. And so I want to define some terms so we're on the same page. All right, what we focus on is near-term iterative forecasts. What do we mean by near-term? Days to decades ahead. And we approach this with the idea that I will actually be able to evaluate it in my reasonable lifetime. I can produce end-of-century projections of the state of the world, till I burn through all my compute power. But I'll never know whether they actually came true, and I'll never know whether they were any good. And so we focus on these shorter term timescales where management decisions can really come in and they can be evaluated. Iterative means that it's not a one and done thing. We're producing new forecasts as regularly as we need to do for the end user or for the learning process and updating them as new data comes available. And then finally, a forecast. What do I mean by a forecast? The prediction of the future with quantified uncertainty. In our view, a single line is not a forecast. And on the left-hand side or right-hand side is a paper that we wrote in a class, in ecological, a graduate class, where it was a review on the state of the art of forecasting and some best practices. And if you look in the literature for the term near-term ecological forecast, it's really accelerating as a field. These are the number of forecasts we found in the published literature. And just so I like to get everyone on the same page. This is an example of an iterative near-term forecast. These are 2 forecasts that started on 2 different dates. They run, in this case, 30 days in the future. So that's a 30-day ahead horizon with 2 different, what we call a reference start date, which is the beginning point of that forecast, done 2 different periods with uncertainty demonstrated. And the observations, didn't go into this water temperature forecast, but they're shown after the fact to show that the forecasts are reasonable.
Same model in both cases.
Same model. Yeah. The only thing that differed is time. So a new weather forecast was used to drive them, and data was, this data was available to update the model before this forecast started. Yeah.
So I read in the New York Times this morning about weather, water temperatures have been rising every day for the past year. And I wonder, that's from 2021, so your model's gonna change, you think, pretty significantly as you start to get data from more recently, or?
Well, warmer conditions should be captured in the most recent weather forecasts.
Okay.
So yeah, it would capture those changes over time. And our models have the ability to learn through time by, adjusting parameters. So if anything, like structural changes with the system due to warming, the models may be able to adjust themselves. If not, we'll learn their performance is now consistently biased, and we need to go back and revisit the core equations underneath the model.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
So
Go ahead.
you said overlap, you validate the model or test against itself?
Well, our automated pipelines, actually, as soon as the data piece comes in, it automatically scores it. And so we're always scoring forecasts as data comes in, so we can always look back to see how the performance has been over the past month.
So you typically report on forecast like this, or you also predict densities?
Say that again?
So in this kind of context, do you often care about the point forecast, or you actually also do density forecast?
We evaluate with tools like the continuous rank probability score or the log score, basically scoring functions that take into account basically where the PDF is located relative to the data. So we typically try to evaluate that, to get the uncertainty right, not just the point. Okay, cool. So our vision is to be an interdisciplinary leader in forecasting research, training, and applications by integrating predictive modeling, cyber infrastructure, and decision support to understand and manage ecosystems across the globe. And I highlighted understand and manage because we like to understand how, say, forests and lakes work, advanced fundamental knowledge, while also serving end users. And so that duality means that we're not just always trying to get the best machine learning model that predicts it perfectly, but we have no idea why. It's always balanced against like, hey, can we learn something from a underlying process model? And so that duality kind of reflects the full platform of kind of approaches that we have. And so I just wanted to briefly introduce the team. Caitlin Carey is a co-director. We have 2 postdocs on the team right now. We have an environmental data scientist, a sensor technician, a program coordinator, and hopefully to be announced, a research software engineer on the team. And so this is the kind of the crew going forward, where 100% of their time, outside the co-directors, is dedicated towards center activities. And we're supported. We are, you can't have a center that's not in a unit. We're a very research focused center. We're not a service center. Like, we're not handing out small grants. We're like, a platform of prediction. And so a very natural home was the College of Science. They really stepped up to take the leadership, but that's only emphasizing that it's a cross-college effort, and you just have to have an administrative home. We've gotten financial support and a lot of buy-in from the College of Natural Resources, and we're physically housed in Steger Hall. So we're a affiliated center with the Fralin Life Sciences, and that's our space down there on the bottom. So we actually have a little bit of space where everyone can be co-located. And we're supported by numerous NSF grants, National Park Service grants. The Calhoun family has been generous with their philanthropic support for this effort. And we have a lot of partners with the Western Virginia Water Authority, which provides water to the Roanoke area. NEON, which I mentioned, Lake Centipede Protective Association in New Hampshire, and which we've had research ongoing there for over 20 years. And then on a global grassroots network that we helped found back in 2019 called the Ecological Forecast Initiative, which is like an international society dedicated to this field. All right, and our mission can be visualized in this figure. Our mission is to collect high quality data. Our mission is to use that data to build and constrain better models, to quantify that uncertainty in those models, to generate forecasts. that then feeds back into improving our data collection. We also, our mission is to provide high quality training and translation to end users. And the training aspect ranges from teaching graduate classes in this area, which I'm currently just finished teaching 2 hours ago, to sponsoring CMDA capstone courses in this area. We have kind of a, I'll talk about it, but like this web app platform where anyone can learn about forecasting through Shiny Apps that has been taught at, over like over 20,000 students have learned through this. And so there's many different aspects to the training aspect.
You have an undergrad class as well.
My undergrad class is environmental data science. We have one small unit of forecasting. And so I'm going to start, give a little bit of a smorgasbord of different application areas. And I wanted to start with the water quality forecasting, which is the thing that we really kind of build a lot of our steam up on. And I just want to highlight this slide here because we really like this interplay between application and data science, something that advances, that's fun to work on, advances fundamental understanding with respect to the ecosystem, but also that it has some interesting kind of like applications that you could just translate to another system that aren't specific to that system. And so, the water quality is a really fun one to work on because, algal blooms and low oxygen are increasing lakes globally. And, we want to be able to kind of preemptively manage those. You can actually do things like pump oxygen in the bottom of a reservoir. You can change the level that you might pull water from. You can actually make decisions in response to a forecast. And so those forecasts can help guide preemptive management. And, as an ecologist by training, this integration of physics, chemistry, and biology just makes it like fun to work on. It's a system where we don't know the equations. And so it's not like, the Navier-Stokes equations govern everything, like the atmosphere. We just have to figure out how to solve them better. This is like, we don't even know like how populations behave. And on the data science side, there's a real need for the automated forecast. So there's a real cyber infrastructure need for about at least a week of lead time. There's a heterogeneous observational systems, meaning that we have really good sensors. You could have airborne platforms. There's all different kinds of ways in which data could flow in. And the work we've done involves fusing mechanistic models with data, similar to how I described the weather forecasting enterprise. And so we built this framework called Forecasting Lakes and Reservoir Ecosystems, which kind of follows this broad diagram where we collect, we have sensors in the field where we pull in from either in the lake or kind of outside the lake, for example, like streams flowing into a lake, things like that. And we move it into our cloud storage. And that data is used to drive a lake process model, which produces our best guess of today. Then we bring in the data of today to update that model. And we use a particular approach called the ensemble common filter to kind of assimilate that data, to adjust that model to be as consistent as possible with the data, given the observational uncertainty in the data. And then that sets the initial conditions for a forecast where we pull from the NOAA 35-day global ensemble forecasting system to produce the output that then gets archived for future evaluation and displayed on a dashboard or emailed actually to the water authority as well in some derived forms. And so that's the kind of the general enterprise associated with this sort of near-term water quality forecasting, and then just rinses and repeats every day. Where the starting condition of tomorrow's forecast was today's prediction of tomorrow, and so we just keep churning this. And so that's one example. So we've applied this FLAIR framework to at this point 15 different lakes and reservoirs across the globe, including some in Australia. The ones in the U.S. Include the neon lakes. We've had international visitors come from Ireland as well, and we had a whole host of Australians here 2 weeks ago to work on those lakes. And then we apply this to 3 different drinking water sources for Roanoke.
So the forecasting is not limited to the Virginia state, it's global.
Mm-hmm. Global, yes. mean, all you need is the weather forecasting drivers are global. You can get, a lot of people know the shapes of their lakes, which you need, and so you can, and there's a lot of places that put buoys that collect water temperature or other things and sensors, and so we work with them to help get their data real time available, and then it can just plug and play.
What
Because
other variables do you need for that?
Well, it depends on, so because it's built off of a process-based hydrodynamic model, we can rely, we don't need necessarily a large time series to calibrate a model because it has a lot of the dynamics built into the equations. And so, we can get, so we need some sort of in situ measurements like water temperature. We can handle all kinds of variables in the lake. We need, if there's a major river or stream flowing in, we need a forecast of that, which we are developing different techniques to do that. And then meteorological drivers. And then any knowledge about possible management that might be done, like withdrawals or opening and closing weirs, things like that. Okay, so that's one example. So another project we're working on is the Neon Ecological Forecasting Challenge. And this is a project where we've developed a cyber infrastructure platform around this Neon project, where it allows anybody to submit a forecast of Neon data before it's collected. And then we store the forecast and we constantly evaluate them and make them available. And so we call it a challenge because it's not a competition. We're not giving away money. We encourage idea sharing, but it's kind of akin to a data science challenge. But what makes it really fundamentally different is that forecasts are accepted every day. So that the data is continually evolving and it's a genuine forecast of the future. And to date, we've had over 2.5 million forecasts that have been submitted. And it's been used in over 15 graduate classes as like the foundational project for the class. Because students can, the forecasts are for, I'll get into this later. Actually, I go into this in a lot more detail when I talk about our cyber infrastructure. But because the forecasts are relatively short-term, students get feedback very quickly, and it can lead to a lot of rapid learning about the forecasting enterprise.
So all of them use the same model that you have?
No, this is all different kind of models.
Interesting.
Yeah, we've had nearly 300 different modeling types be applied to this.
So any of them actually use nonlinear models then? Yeah.
Anybody can submit any kind of model. They just have to have uncertainty. That's the only rule.
No, I'm just curious, anyone actually use a nonlinear models actually beat the model you have?
Oh, yeah. So I don't have a lot of results in this talk because I didn't, but we spent a lot of time developing our forecasting framework. But we have this challenge that anyone can submit. There's a timestamp. It's a genuine forecast. There's no way to game it. People submitted, neural networks and XGBoost and other process models. And, we also have baselines like tomorrow's the same as today, or tomorrow's the day to year average of tomorrow. And our modeling framework emerged at the top organically. So we were pretty pleased to see that. But we sort of we didn't mean it to be like a take us on kind of thing. And it wasn't that way, but we were pretty pleased how that turned out. And a postdoc is writing, Ray is writing that up now. So we have another project called the Virginia Reservoir Long-Term Research in Environmental Biology. This is a really cool program from the National Science Foundation. If you can show 6 continuous years of data collection at a site and argue that the continued data collection at that site will yield to fundamental scientific advances, NSF has a program to basically continue that data collection, guaranteed for 5, and then a very simple renewal for 10. And so this is a very PI-driven long-term. And so we said, if we want to know how good we are at a 10-year ahead forecast, the only way to do it is to keep us collecting data. And we also want to understand whether we're better at predicting nutrients or phytoplankton or water temperature. Like, how does the patterns of predictability differ across biological, chemical, and physical components of the system at different timescales? And so, but that data is available, in real time. Anyone can use it, and it's associated with another kind of forecasting challenge as well that I'll mention later. And these reservoirs are outside of Roanoke. These are the drinking water reservoirs at Roanoke. We have this branded educational curriculum that I mentioned. It's called Macrosystems EDI. We have 10 teaching modules, and 4 of them are really dedicated towards teaching concepts of environmental forecasting. And importantly, we publish in the pedagogical literature in this field, where, pre and post surveys, understanding effectiveness. And so there's been a lot of work on this, and over 20,000 students have completed modules at over 35 universities across the globe. Like intro to ecology students at University of Georgia learn about ecology through a lens of forecasting. And we found it to be really exciting because the students feel like it's like, I'm not just like learning some kind of set of body of knowledge. There's an application of this, and it makes them pretty excited to engage the concepts. And then we also have another grant that's really getting off the ground now. It's through a Rules of Life program at the National Science Foundation. It's about using individual-based models for algal bloom forecasting, and trying to overcome some of the computational limitations of that. And it's spread across colleges, and that's really kind of getting going there as well. And then we are also working on applying for a global center for freshwater forecasting from the National Science Foundation. Our center will be the coordinating center behind it, but it'll be a centers effort. We were funded by the National Science Foundation for a planning grant, and that then prepares us to go for a center grant. And this is one of these grants. It's like NSF puts in like 5 million, Australia puts in 5 million, and you build a global center. And it's a real thing because the co-director and I spent our sabbatical in Australia working with these folks, like 20 years of publishing together. They all flew over here 2 weeks ago, and we had like the coolest week-long hackathon working on the foundational infrastructure for what this center will look like. It's basically going to almost happen regardless of whether it gets funded, because it's just like everyone's so into it. And so some additional projects, we have some grants from the National Science Foundation from their computer science division, focused on enhancing discoverability of forecasts by improving metadata standards and descriptions, and thinking about how one search engine can help discover all, you could type in algal bloom forecasts in Southern Lakes, I don't know, something like that. And it will return, kind of like a set of that, and you can discover what's being forecasted where a little bit more easily. We're working on developing an R package that actually, it's called FASR, F-A-A-S-R, that allows you to write your code in R and easily move between cloud providers. And so we can demonstrate how our workflows can be accomplished, where we launch it and some runs on Amazon Lambda, some runs on the IBM cloud, some runs on GitHub Actions, some runs on a self-hosted kind of server, and then it comes back together to coalesce the answer. And so it really allows you to take advantage of cloud resources without being baked in to a particular cloud provider. We have a couple of national parks projects focusing on forecasting forest response to atmospheric pollution and Lake Mead water quality. And finally, a project, this is led by Anuj Party, but Kaylin's involved with it, on knowledge guided machine learning and ecology. And so that's the kind of the suite of projects that we're kind of managing right now. And so the idea is, why are we the Center for Ecosystem Forecasting? It's because we're not the Center for Freshwater Forecasting, because we do more than water. And so it spans ecosystem types. And what do we mean by a center for forecasting? It's a platform of forecasting tools, methods, and frameworks that all kind of interlock so that they're not one-off projects. And so as a result of this, you can see that there's an explosion of data, and we have an explosion of methods. And so what do we do with this? There's all different ways that you can predict water temperature or algal blooms. And there's all different kinds of data sources we could use. And so, it's really, it's a grand challenge really to put these things together. And so what we really focus on is this idea of thinking about the Lego blocks of our center. What are the little pieces that you can stitch together where you can get interlocking components that allow us to combine functions with packages, with models, with modules, and it's a kind of a plug and play sort of concept. I can build the whole glue analogy is fun because, one, you build something Legos, you're like, I love this. And you think I'm gonna glue it so it'll stay together forever. But now you can't rebuild it into something else. You maybe decide you like that one little piece of it and you want to put in your other castle you have. It's stuck. So less monoliths and more Lego pieces. You can also, technically, I guess it's a Lego object if you glue them together, don't stick them together. No, you need them to kind of connect together. And because of this approach, there's a real focus on standards. Like this is what makes a center is thinking about the interoperability. Legos are defined by the standards. Like if you follow these standards, they will fit together. And so, yes, I guess you could glue two Legos on the sides, but like, let's not use glue. Let's use the standards. And so, what are the standards that we use? One could think of standards as column names, column types, and data. And we've done that. We've written a paper. This was work that was with the kind of the ecological forecasting initiative writ large as part of this research coordination network that I run, where we kind of really focus on trying to find a flexible kind of data structure that allows for folks to submit forecasts in both an ensemble framework. So they submit a bunch of different predictions that are maybe equally likely, they're just identified by some identifier, or a parametric forecast, like a mean and a standard deviation. We wanted to have a single kind of file format that can handle that. And so we developed this kind of framework that we published and put out there to the community. And so this is sort of maybe a more standard view of standards, but we also view standards through the lens of your compute environment, where your data is stored, how you access your data, and how you describe it. And so, our compute environment, we really focus on Docker containers. We focus on using things like GitHub Actions, or basically calling these Docker containers from different kind of compute environments. But once you have these containers that have your software encapsulated in it, you can kind of move it around. We rely heavily on S3 Object Store. And that includes your various cloud providers that you've probably heard of, but also if you have an NSF grant, there's Open Storage Network that's available for you. Source Cooperative is a new one that basically provides quite a bit of storage for free, and then you can host your own through something like MinIO. And the object store that's a puzzle piece. We've actually moved around our stuff between cloud providers multiple times as a need arise. And so that's an example of, because we had this Lego brick that we could just pop over here, as opposed to being like built into some giant server that could only run there. Range requests, this idea that we want to be able to subset a range of data. There's very few use cases where you can imagine pulling all forecasts for all variables, predicted for all time. And so developing the capacity to kind of go after the small little range of the data that you need to answer a question is fundamental. And we rely on things like Apache Arrow and DuckDB as the tools that underpin our claim. And then documentation. Everyone is comfortable with things like our Markdown and Cordo. All our websites or dashboards are built in Cordo that are automatically built every day. So they kind of reflect the latest forecasts. And then we describe our forecast using a framework called STAC, Spatial Temporal Asset Catalog, which is a series of JSONs that follow standards that, when structured in a certain way, really makes a nice web browser. So this compute environment, reproducibility is a fundamental issue. We all know that. This is like a ChatGPT thing. The code didn't work when I used it. Try to find the bug. It says it worked on my machine. That's like the classic. It is so embedded into ChatGPT. That's the answer you get back, because that's what you're going to get from anyone you ask. And so this like Dante's Inferno of reproducibility kind of leads to these sort of standards we like to work with in terms of the compute environment. Object store. I mean, S3 storage is now. I just came back from a meeting to envision the future of the federal government's ecological forecasting infrastructure. And there was like no disagreement that the future is the cloud. and that, and that the future is largely in kind of S3 based storage access. And so this is just an example from a Wired where it's like, you ask a teacher, it's like, oh, like students have totally forgotten how to access files on their computer. They don't understand it. It's like, do they really need to know it? I mean, like this world of cloud, object store and things, it's like the path is like a little bit of an irrelevant thing. Range requests, this is just an example of how you can access all our scores for a particular forecasting challenge with an arrow call. And then you can then apply filters and subsets to that, and then finally collect it locally and pull just a bit. So, one line of code can provide access to our entire data stores.
Is Parquet the file format?
Yes.
For
Yep. And so here's a use case of the value of standards. This is that NEON forecasting challenge that I talked about. Again, NEON is a standardized terrestrial and freshwater data across the US with ongoing, and it's freely available. And so this is a platform that NSF has put a lot of money in. And it's like a $300 million 30-year project. And so we've developed, but they don't forecast. Even though in the mission, founding mission was to understand and forecast, they don't do the forecasting. And so we wrote a proposal to wrap a project around it to get the community forecasting data before it's collected. And so this is a paper we wrote on it. It's this platform that challenges and empowers a community to submit these iterative near-term forecasts that yet to be collected in NEON data. You can learn more about it at neonforecast.org. And this is was a fun little 2-page that we wrote, kind of giving an overview of it. And these are the things that this challenge predicts. It predicts water temperature, forecasts water temperature, chlorophyll A, which is algal blooms, oxygen, carbon cycling, water cycling in terrestrial systems, beetle biodiversity, tick populations, and actually the greenness of canopies is taken from photographs above a canopy. These were all chosen by over 200 people involved in a community-wide meeting where there was this, we culled through all the 81 data sets, and the community kind of like got behind 5 of them. And they're designed to cover population, community, ecosystem, and terrestrial axes. And so this is the kind of framework behind a forecasting challenge, where you start with the observatory networks. That data is kind of, not raw. They do their QA/QC, they make it available, but we translate it into standardized, predictable file formats that we call our target data. And that follows those standards that we mentioned. So it's interoperable with the forecasts and the scores. Then we actually use that target data to generate baseline forecasts. So it's like, can you beat climatology? Can you beat persistence? We make those targets available to the forecasting teams through a predictable URL where the data set just keeps evolving every day. And so if you hit this URL, you'll get the latest data. And you can use any data to build your model because it's a forecast. It's fundamentally out of sample. We make numerical weather forecasts available for those 81 sites to lower the barrier of entry. So you don't also have to know how to like parse a crazy grid file from like NOAA, that we go ahead and do that for you. So we're trying to identify the friction points because, for our use case of an ecologist, trying to become more quantitative in their work. So they generate forecasts, it goes into this catalog on S3 Store, and then every day as that new target data comes in, we revisit the forecast, we update the scores in real time. Those are displayed on a dashboard. We write papers from it. We've already had one paper on the phenology, the greenness, working on another one now on water, the water forecasting challenge. And then fundamental to that too is this training and templates. We go to meetings, we go to the Ecological Society of America, we go to the American Geophysical Union, we go to the Limnological Society, Global Limnological Society, and we meet them there. We say, hey, you want to learn how to forecast? And so we grow the field that way. And so we launched this, so it begins. And this is just an example of going to the Global Lakes Ecological Observatory Network and saying, hey, well, we're going to have a workshop on a Sunday, and the winner by Friday of the best forecast, because it's near term, iterative, real time, wins a mug. And so we developed kind of like templates to really like lower the barrier of entry. And one of the ways we lower the barrier to entry is by teaching folks how to use GitHub Actions to automate their forecasts without them having to do it on their own computer. And we use these tools of standards. For example, we created a container for them that has all the packages that they may need, particularly those custom packages that we have built. Then, they just have to run a single line of code here that they put their forecast model in this, and as long as their forecast serializes it in the standard, which we provide a template, we wrote in our package that submits it to the challenge for them. And so this runs at 20 UTC every day in someone's repo. And so we were able to kind of make it lower that barrier of entry. And forecasts are coming in. Here's an example of a forecast of this is net ecosystem. No, this is phenology greenness at 2 different sites. These are the examples of the baselines. One is tomorrow's the same as today, and the other is the historical average of that day of year in the past. And so, hey, that looks good. That's manageable. Then the community said, this is cool. We want to do it. And these are total monthly submissions. When we kind of got going and then, hey, you should hang out with us. We're cool. And then boom, we want to go after this. And so all of a sudden we go from processing, 10 forecasts a month to 5,000 forecasts a month. And so, we're just sitting around like, hey, it's fine. It's cool. We're going to be good. And then all our automated jobs go down because it starts to fill up the runtime that GitHub Actions, the free compute we were using, does. And so what do you do here? Do you throw your hands up? Do you quit? No. You literally change one line of code to say, hey, you know what? Some of us on this team actually have a little bit more local compute. We launched a self-hosted runner on a server and just changed one line of code to say self-hosted, and it directed it to that. That had a larger runtime and a greater memory. And so because we're operating under this container standards, it's just, and the reds go to green. And so that allows us to have, there's a growing interest. We want more variables, we want more sites, and we want to engage more partners. And so what we've done is we've basically our entire cyber infrastructure for this forecasting challenge is encapsulated in a single GitHub repo that can be forked. And along with it travels all the things like generating targets, submission processing, automatic scoring, downloading of drivers, development of the dashboard, construction of the catalog, development of the baseline models. This is all encapsulated in a single repo that can be forked. And that's been done. And so this underlying framework is now being used both for the forecasting challenge that I mentioned of the local reservoirs, and also the USGS has completely forked what we've done and modified it for their usage to do a river forecasting challenge. And so you can see how similar these dashboards are. It's because this is the reuse of a lot of the Lego bricks that we put together. And now where we're building up to is this catalog of catalogs where to kind of discover, where you can find different forecasts across different kind of forecasting challenges that are, at different, where somebody that we don't have to essentially manage everything. Someone else can run the challenge, but as long as they meet the standards, they get sucked in automatically to the catalog that allows folks to discover what's being forecasted where. And this is an example of the spatial asset catalog that I mentioned. And yeah, so the idea is that this is a platform that's built off of standards that many others can reuse. And kind of pulling back to the center, this idea that we think that forecasting the environment is an organizing principle across campus. It's not this idea that we have all these people who are forecasters. It's that the forecasting is an enterprise that involves all of these different elements and the collaboration among these different elements. No one person would say, hey, I'm a tick forecaster. It's like, no, but like, are you involved in data model visualization? Are you involved in improving our ability to observe the world? Are you involved in decision science, the philosophy of modeling in science? All these different aspects we think are related to the forecasting enterprise writ large. And when viewed through this lens is a very integrative kind of perspective. And so, look for more kind of CF like seminars and workshops and community building events. Like for example, last February, we brought in Carl Bodeger from Berkeley, and he gave an open reproducible workflows in R seminar, and then a talk later and a reception that was jointly sponsored by the Academy of Data Science on ecological decision-making at the limits of prediction. And we're excited to kind of have these sorts of things as like the touch points for getting the community together. And also say the date, we're hosting an international ecological forecasting conference in May 2025 that will be open to the community. It's sort of like an all hands type meeting that will be the local host for. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Amazing amount of stuff.
Yeah, we have this board that has everything on it, and it says if you erase this, you like doom will befall all of us. So, yeah, no, we that's why we brought a program manager on board and growing staff.
This is like Kaggle.
Is it like Kaggle? That's a good question. Yeah. So Kaggle, at least when I last looked at it, one, Kaggle's, we might be a little bit of a too small of a player for Kaggle.
Yes.
And two, there's some examples of these sort of real-time iterative forecasts, but it's very much more driven around this idea of like a holdout data set that folks get multiple goes at. And it's like, hey, you have till May 1 to kind of get your score down. And then we put this in. The cool thing about what we're doing is that the organizers can participate in it because no one has access to the future. Maybe we have a little more experience and training, going into it, but like there's the holdout data set is, time will tell. And so this sort of near-term iterative kind of approach is slightly different than Kaggle. I think Kaggle did have like a COVID forecasting where it was iterative, where you had to submit like once a week. So I don't want to, make the perception that we're like, completely like, novel and not, they don't even do it. But Kaggle has a slightly different use case.
Yeah, do you provide prize for winners? I know Kaggle provides a huge amount of money to winners.
Yeah, no, we don't provide, it's glory, it's papers, right now. There's been a lot of like, CI kinks to work around, some understanding about how best to do this field. So I'm glad we didn't like go out of the gate with like a $20,000 prize. Because, we're learning a lot about how to do this, in the process. And so, in the future, I can envision thinking about how to engage the kind of machine learning more a little bit, like we're exploring ideas of how to basically reformat the data sets so that they're more akin to what might be on a website, like a Hugging Face kind of thing. Where it becomes like benchmarks. Because apparently there's not a lot of good time series like benchmarks in the ML world, and that like people would love to have environmental data sets as benchmark data sets, as opposed to just some of the standards that are out there. So thinking about how to engage the ML community where they are a little bit more, I think is an interesting path forward that it could lend itself more to the Kaggle world. But the Kaggle world, the answer is already known. It's XGBoost, right?
Do you see neural networks with sequential data like RNNs and LSTMs in the methods being used for ecological forecasting?
Yes, the KGML project, the knowledge guided machine learning and ecology, uses a lot of that. We've worked with thinking about actually LSTMs in a slightly different perspective, but the idea that like using the and this is work that Anuj Kaparti did out of his group, where you train a water temperature prediction on vertical, like a neural network on vertical profiles of temperature, and then you use that to make a prediction. And they had a lot of success with basically tuning taking an output of a process model and combine that with data with like a neural network to generate a knowledge guided kind of predictions that combine what was in the model with the data, but it's encapsulated in the neural network. But we asked them, it's like, we don't want that because you only give us a line. We want uncertainty. And so they went to like the standard like knockout method, which I know is like, kind of not a robust method of uncertainty quantification. And they came back and like, this doesn't work, partially because some of the physics that's built into the physics guided machine learning, like they had a hard constraint that density had to go down or had to go up as you went down in the water. Like you can't have more dense water on top. But when you start doing like knockouts of weights and things like that, it actually like the physics you baked in falls apart. And so your uncertainty propagation doesn't actually reflect this like physics anymore. And so they went back and actually did this thing called knowledge guided architecture, where they actually baked the physics into the nodes rather than actually just having it as like a data constraint. It was able to propagate uncertainty according to the initial work that a little bit better. So that's actually a great example of like a collaborator was like, we have this. It's like, no, here's the constraint. If you don't have uncertainty, we don't want it. And then that led to innovation on their end of things.
You think transformers will transform this way of analysis as well?
I'm not that up to date on the details of transformers, so I'll have to punt on that question.
The capstone team's using LSTMs this semester, so we'll see what kind of results they get.
Yeah.
See if these sort of two missions, I mean, one is of infrastructure and standards and providing this kind of service for the community, and the other is actually doing the forecast, right? And
the training.
And it's okay, yes, and of course, okay, I don't want to cut out the education, but I guess on the research side, there comes a point where like you're happy with the model, perhaps, right? Maybe you're never happy, but really, how do you view sustainability, right? You don't want your group to have to maintain sort of legacy models forever. You'd like someone else to take those on and be responsible. How does that work in reality? Or
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a mark of success if we can offboard the operations of a model to a partner.
go client, yeah.
I think on the early phases, we sort of met with like the Lincoln about like what like a business model might look like.
Right.
We use because of the infrastructure that I talked about and all the bricks, like we use a lot of open source software. That's foundational. We do open source, we do modularity, reuse, things like that. And so like you can't patent our software. And so the business model would be basically fee for service.
Yeah.
And that is a model that one could go. That does divert you away from like the professor track. And so it's sort of balance there of like, we didn't initially want to go down that route, but it's sort of that is kind of a route you could do. And there's also that kind of the offboarding onto a client. And that's some of the work that we're working with the local water authority that doesn't really have the capacity to absorb it. We're also partners for them and we're happy to do it. But as more water authorities come on board, we want to find mechanisms to be like, hey, here, take it.
Yeah, I know it was an issue we have with the capstone projects, right?
Yeah,
Okay, it's like, right, if so, no one's gonna maintain it after you graduate,
Yep.
and so you hand it off back to the client, and hope that they found it useful, but they maybe don't have the skill set to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or infrastructure. Or
Yeah, I think that's like, I think in this kind of environmental forecasting world, the idea of operationalizing forecasts is still kind of at the frontier. Because it's not like it's like something that's produced by major. I mean, the federal government supports a lot of this stuff, but it tends to be, like Great Lakes related algal blooms but in terms of like, there's a lot that falls through the cracks of like what like big agencies work on. And so, that process of like offboarding onto a client, these sort of things that are still kind of in production mode. Hopefully we get there, but we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, there's that area where it's no longer kind of an interesting research project for your grad students, right? And but at the same time, it's not done. So it's hard. Yeah.
But we're creating a external advisory board to like that has like folks who kind of are aspirational or has these different elements that we will be able to pull together some of the expertise to kind of do some of these strategies that really I think require an external perspective on. Because there isn't quite no other university has a center quite like this. So we have to piece together.
Yeah.
Experiences of others.
It's cool.
In your mind, I love that modularity, the sort of the ideas that you have with that, and is that something that goes way beyond ecological forecasting? Is it something that, oh, we should be learning that in business, we should everyone be doing that, and how kind of universal are these specs?
Oh, well, I mean, the idea of modularity is like foundational to good like software engineering.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like it's anywhere near original,
But
but
it's not like I teach anyone that stuff, like, oh yeah, read in the CSV file and do something, right?
I mean, we have to decide, like, I mean, like, I think that we have to decide to start teaching this stuff and like, you know, how to, that it has value. I think that particularly when it can be emphasized as being platform agnostic and vendor agnostic, that we feel like we understand the fundamental like concepts and teach those. Or standards start to be so widely adopted. Like S3 is an Amazon thing, but it's like the protocols were invented by, you know, but it's so widely used across other platforms. It's like, yeah, so like that's like a de facto standard. So it wouldn't be just like, hey, let's come in and let's teach you all about what Amazon has to offer. It's like, here, this is a. So yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, this sort of relates to we're thinking about like what a certificate might look like in this at the university, you know, how it could be like a possible like a concentration within the masters of applied data science. And you know, like what do we need to teach? And I think that like I try to introduce this stuff in my class, but I'm teaching them like a lot at once, and you can only scratch the surface. But a whole class dedicated to a lot of these sort of cloud-based tools, reproducibility, you know, modularity, but applied to these sort of data science and like predictive problems, and leave behind the detailed like hardcore computer science. I think could go a long way to preparing our students for.
As I'm preparing the foundations course for the degree, I put in data engineering principles, their file formats, they org, Avro, Parquet.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to be exposed to this to understand what they are and why they're so useful, right?
Yeah, you need to.
To me, wherever I go, if it's not in the database, Parquet is the winning format right now, right? So you need to know how to use it and what it's good for. Not CSV, it's devil's work.
But we got to present them with these cool cases where you like send them home with a problem and they discover themselves what that CSV is the devil's work. Because it's like, hey, solve this problem with this way or that way. And it's like, oh man, like I can read a Parquet from like that. That's, yeah.
Multi-file.
Yeah.
Other questions for Quinn?
What kind of computational challenges are you still facing?
I can tell you the one we have today is that NSF's Jetstream 2 and Indiana University tried to fix their power this weekend, and they've lost all their, they haven't brought it back up yet. So if you go to our dashboard, everything's down. So there's a computational challenge, is that when you rely on distributed cloud resources, you do have choke points that you might not have full control over.
And more like coming up with methods for computational solutions. I know resources and how much they cost and etc. are a challenge, but coming up with methods to improve some computation.
Yeah. Well,
what's that?
So, you know, because we don't want to, I'll set the ML stuff aside and talk more about the process modeling. Because we're really excited to work about these models that represent like the growth and death of individual organisms. And when you start to build out, just imagine, all right, so we have, you know, like a deep lake, and we have all these different layers, and every layer has nutrients and phytoplankton and all that kind of thing, that your state space really gets large.
We're gonna do agent-based model.
Or agent-based models, yeah, and so we're kind of exploring, but you want to do this like data assimilation kind of approach, and so the most effective way to doing data assimilation on large state problems, I think is an area that we're kind of working on that does run into some computational kind of limitations. Particularly if you get the 3D hydrodynamic models. Like we want to do basically water quality data assimilation using 3D hydrodynamic. That's why we brought the Australians in 2 weeks ago. With agents in.
Sorry, I have to get.
And has data assimilation. That's going to run into computational challenges.
Yeah.
We're going to want to run on GPUs, which you know is a thing, and we're going to be able to need to like deal with large matrix inversions and things like that.
Another question. Thanks again, Quinn, for this excellent presentation.